We've mentioned a couple of times ptags. We did tag searches where we went out and found tags, and then we actually looked at some of the attributes of tags using this point builder. But what is a tag? Well, as you can see, a tag has attributes, but that's not what you're interested in. It's like the old saying, when you buy a drill, you don't want a drill, you need a hole, right? Well, it's like that with ptags. When you create a tag, you're interested in a tag not because of its attributes, but because of the data that you're going to store in that tag. So let me go ahead and bring up a copy of Excel. Now this copy is using the data link add-in to retrieve some tag values from the Pi server. So here's a tag called CDT158, that's its tag name. It's a real, as you can see. We're bringing in real-time data. Here's the timestamp, here's the values. That's what you create a tag for, so that you have a history of the data. We have integer tags. We have something called digital tags, where we have digital states. A finite number of possible values there. So, first and foremost, a tag contains values. So one of the most important attributes of a tag is that it contains values in the form of timestamps and values. So that's the history that goes with a tag. Now this is a real good time to remind you that we do have other ways of finding tags than that tag search. In fact, the best way, the premier way, the way we're asking everybody to use in the future, is to use our asset framework called PiAF. This is the Pi System Explorer. You can see through the Pi System Explorer, I can traverse through a hierarchy to find individual pieces of equipment, like down here in production in this mixing room. I can find a pump. And this particular pump has certain attributes hanging off of it, and one of those attributes is a Pi tag. So a Pi tag can be found using AF. A Pi tag is a data reference for AF. So, when it comes to finding what you're interested in, you can use tag search, but you can also use AF, and that's what we strongly suggest. There's a search mechanism within here as well. And in most cases, the destination for this search is going to end up being a Pi tag. As you can see, it's the same Pi tag we were looking at before. Now, Pi tags have certain naming conventions. I'm just going to bring up your class material for a second. And if you're interested in what the naming conventions are, here's a list of the characters you can't use. Here's some things we suggest you might want to use. But of course, naming conventions, like any naming convention, they're up to you. So we're not going to go into a lot of detail on that. But that's where you'd find more information. Now, one of the attributes of a Pi tag is something called its point class. So here's some Pi tags, existing Pi tags. They have point classes of classic. And the classic point class has certain attribute sets that are common across that point class. Now, when you create a brand new Pi tag, let me go ahead and create a new one here. I'll just call this test. As you can see, you can choose one of these 5 different point classes. Now, the only ones you'll typically be using are going to be classic and maybe rarely base when you're creating just regular Pi tags. If you're creating special purpose tags like totalizers or SQC alarms or traditional alarms, then you can choose these other point classes. And when you do make that change to the point class, you'll notice a different set of attributes appear. So when I go to alarm, for example, we see there are some alarm attributes that you can change. Totalizer is another point class. As you can see, it brings up all different types of attributes that aren't in the regular point class, the classic point class. Now, the base point class is rarely used. It's a point class that's used for things that are not getting their data from an instrument system, from a traditional interface. So as you can see, some of these classic attributes are not they're not supported with the base point class. So for the most part, you're going to be using classic point class. That's the default. If you don't change it, that's what you're going to get as a Pi point class. Now, this point class list is actually extensible. You'll notice, for example, if you're using Pi COM connectors, part of the installation of that is going to be to install a new point class so that you'll see a new point class here that you would use for COM connector tags. And when I say it's extensible, it's not just OSIsoft that can extend it. These can be user-defined point classes as well.